All right, with that, I will let Kimberly Dickey and Dee Horton take it from here.
Hey folks, can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Hi, this is Kimberly Dickey, and I'm going to start our webinar on gig work this morning. And as you can all see, this is a fall background here. I'm thinking that next month we need to change this to a spring background, but I'm going to get started going over some information about gig work before I pass it over to Dee Horton. Okay, so gig work. What is gig work? This is what we're going to go over: gross income versus net, some tools for verification, and two different calculation methods. And then I'm going to talk very briefly about peer-to-peer payment apps like Venmo. So gig work, what is gig work and what is gig work income? According to HUD, gig workers are considered independent contractors. Therefore, they don't get taxes taken out of the pay that they receive. Independent contracting is a specific type of self-employment where you work for clients on a project by project basis. So think about an Uber driver, project to project basis. An independent contractor in this context for the housing choice voucher and other voucher programs is considered the same as someone just being self-employed. And the major difference in my mind for being self-employed or being employed by an employer is that the employer takes taxes out of your paycheck. If you're self-employed, you get the whole paycheck and you got to pay taxes on your own. Gig work income, since it's considered the same as self-employment, it does not appear in EIV reports or Department of Labor reports. You know that for some folks, Division of Housing can pull DOL reports. That's Department of Labor and Employment. However, gig work would not show up on these reports. So verification for this employment always has to come directly from the voucher participant or the applicant to a program. They have to tell us about this income. Some common examples of gig work include Lyft, DoorDash, Uber, some Amazon employment, Grubhub, and GigSmart. HUD requires in these cases that we actually count the net income, not the gross, and I'll talk about a little bit of those differences in the following slides. But net income is essentially the gross earnings, which is the whole paycheck minus allowable business expenses like gas if you're driving a car, maintenance if you're driving a car, tolls, these are all for driving a car, car loan interest, items for passengers, water, gum, etc. That's nice. Advertising costs or depreciation. You guys know what that word is. Your vehicle. I can't say it. So gross income versus net income. Gross income is the total amount of earned from those gig jobs, while net income is that profit after deducting all those expenses. Some examples I just went over. Uh, this gross income, I'm sorry if you can hear my cat, is typically reported on this particular form to the IRS. And I'm going to talk about the IRS a few times in this slideshow. And I'm going to say what I'm going to say to you right now a few times in this webinar, that we are not the IRS. We use the IRS's rules for this type of income and for some other things, but we are not the IRS, and it is not our responsibility to ensure people pay their taxes. I just want to make that clear because some people won't be able to provide tax forms to you, and that generally means if they don't have them, they probably haven't paid their taxes, but that's not really any of our concern. We're not here to enforce that they pay their taxes, although they should pay their taxes. So again, I'm going to talk about IRS forms in here. Net income is the final profit after subtracting all of those ordinary and necessary business expenses, like all those car things I mentioned, any software they have to buy to do that job, from that total of money they received. So I received $100 for that Uber ride, but I spent $50 in gas. So my net was really only $50. Some drivers will drive for more than one rideshare service, so it's critical to ensure that a voucher holder discloses all sources so that income can be projected accurately as possible. And again, since we're relying on them 100% to report this income, it's rather difficult to verify unless they provide that to us. So there's just a couple of triggers or ways that you might notice that they have income if they haven't reported it, that I'll talk about in future slides, but really it's reliant 99% upon that participant to tell you that they have this income or not. It's not going to show up anywhere on any report we provide. Some verification tools. A primary source of verification is self-employment, is that those tax returns. But again, if they don't file their taxes, they don't have those and they're not going to give them to us. But the law, at least in the last few years, is that if a self-employed individual makes $400 or more per year, I actually believe that's gone up this year. I think it's the threshold is higher, so they don't have to file taxes at 400. I think it's 600 or something per year, or 1,500. Anyway, I don't think this number 400 is accurate. The threshold is actually higher. But if a self-employed individual makes more than a certain amount per year, they're required to file a tax return by law. We are not required to know that. That's why I don't know the exact number. We don't work for the IRS and we don't work for a law enforcement agency. But in general, self-employed folks are supposed to pay taxes, but it's not your job to enforce law or IRS rules should they not have done that and should they not have those things to supply to you. So if you are saying, hey, give me your Schedule C, that'll answer all my questions, and they say I don't have one, that's not a problem for you. That might be a problem for the IRS, but you're not the IRS. Like I said, some participants may not file taxes or they may not know how to verify their earnings or losses for you. We've put some information together from HUD on how this can be accessed for particular companies. I'm sorry, not from HUD, but how you can access from DoorDash or Lyft or other companies, how to do that. I don't actually have that guidance on this slideshow, but we can provide it to you if you want to know, like the website that someone should go for Uber or DoorDash on where to get their tax information. I went through how to do this for some major gig share companies, and it's really easy. And almost every single one, you can do it on their app or on their website. You just click, and if you work for them, you log into your account, and there's your earnings information for a particular period by year or by month or what have you. If the participant says they cannot provide this information, even if you give them the tools to do so, we can accept other forms of verification. But it would be nice if they could give it to you directly from the source. Oh, I guess I did give you some information on how to do that. For Uber and Uber Eats, they can access it directly from Uber's website. They'll only get a tax form if they make more than $20,000 per year. Again, I don't know IRS rules or why, but that's what the website says. So if they did not receive in excess of $20,000, they're not going to get a tax form, but they can still see their earnings on Uber's website, print that off, and share it with you. For Lyft, same thing. They have to have made $20,000 a year or more to get that tax form from Lyft, but they can still look at their earnings, print it off, and share it with you as verification from the Lyft website and the Lyft app. Again, I know I've said this 3 times already, but I'm going to say it again. We are not the IRS and not concerned necessarily whether someone has the correct tax form. We just need to verify their income. We can say to you, hey, just so you know, you should probably pay taxes, but I'm not here to enforce that. DoorDash and Grubhub. So they're going to get a tax form if they made more than $600 per year. Again, I don't know why. Don't care why. I assume DoorDash and Grubhub know the IRS rules. I don't need to know them. But they can go ahead and access their tax forms on those apps and share them with you. If voucher holders state they don't have tax documents or earning summaries, even though we can say to you, hey, I know you can just go get it, but they say they can't. Or if you are not aware they're engaging in gig work, we can accept a notarized statement detailing the estimated net income. The net income, again, is the gross minus all of those expenses. So remember, if they give you a tax document or a payment summary saying, hey, I made $1,000 this month, that's going to show the gross, and they should have the opportunity to only provide us with net, because that's going to be a lower amount, minus that gas, minus that maintenance on that car. And we only are going to count that net. So it's helpful to remind someone that who's self-employed, if they don't realize that, hey, they're providing you with something saying they made $1,000, but really they only walked away with $800 because they had to pay for some stuff. It's okay to remind them that they should be providing you with that net amount so as to reflect their actual earnings. There is no official method for verifying net income. However, there are a couple of different ways, some best practices that HUD provides that I'll go over in a minute. But when in doubt, just document everything. You might be doing it slightly differently for different families. We like to do everything consistently, but one family may have something they can provide you that another family can't. So it's really important to document everything so that if somebody else comes to look at that file, if your SPOC is going to audit that file, they need to understand why you counted a specific income the way you did. So document everything. Note how many hours that tenant works every week. Estimate their pay and write that down and say, this isn't monthly estimate. This is a weekly estimate. Use that income calculation form on our website. Record any assumptions that you used for calculating income. Like maybe they made $1,000 one month and $200 the next month, and then $800 the month after that. And you record an average of those three. Make sure that you write down, this is the average of those three. That's why my number is 600 as opposed to any of those other numbers. Include copies of all the documents and any statements that got you to that number. So just document everything so that DOH can see how you got to that figure. HUD expects that PHAs to make a reasonable judgment and document decisions clearly. So if you're unsure, or if they have a lot of numbers flying at you that aren't making a lot of sense, just contact your SPOC for some additional guidance. Sporadic or insistent gig work income. This is probably going to occur in a lot of these scenarios, at least that I've seen when folks work gig income. It can be inconsistent. They can work a couple months and then their car breaks down and then they don't work again for 6 months. So if the income is inconsistent or stops and starts, the short answer is do the best you can with what you can verify. Even if that verification is the form of a tenant self-declaration. Check their bank statements and see if there's recurring deposits. Recurring deposits from, it's nice. It kind of usually says where they're from Lyft, from Uber. But if you see every month that they're a couple $100 are coming into their bank account on a semi-consistent basis, that's an important flag to ask about. Hey, are you working again? Is this a gig income? Always show your work in how you verified, how you got the information, and what you're ultimately reporting in Elite for their income, or to DOH, I should say. You're not all reporting in Elite. Some of you are sending in, in paperwork. And it's important to remember that self-certification is an acceptable form of verification. It feels like it's not, and it's certainly not the first one we want to go for, but in gig income, it's generally the only one we're going to have. If some of you have never seen this before, this is a real old school slide from HUD that I printed and add here. And this is what I always think about, and I always share with folks who have questions. The first level of verification, the absolute best, is EIV. But we know that none of this gig work is going to be on EIV. So we can go down that verification hierarchy and say, okay, get some written third-party verification. With gig work, they're not going to do that. They're not going to be able to get that unless they're getting it from the website. They're not going to be able to get it from a person at Uber. But hey, they could print that off Uber's website and it could say how much they made for a particular time period. That third-party verification form, again, they're not going to have a boss at Uber. I've never driven for Uber, but I'm thinking you probably don't have a boss that you report to. Same with oral third-party verification. As we go down this hierarchy, they're probably not going to be able to get that. So if they can't get that written third-party verification, if for some reason they can't get something from the website saying how much they've earned, then the only thing we have left is that tenant declaration. And I'm thinking, setups like Etsy, maybe if they're selling things, or I don't know, Poshmark. If they're selling things on the internet, they may not be able to get something showing all their earnings. I don't really know how that works. So tenant declaration may be the only thing they can provide you. And if that's the only thing they can provide you, that's going to have to be okay. And we can accept it. We're not going to push back if that's the only thing that they can provide to us. Just remember, it is an acceptable form of verification to HUD. I'm not really going to talk much about these methods. There's two methods, and I'm just going to briefly touch on them. There's two methods that HUD outlines for calculating gross versus net. The first one is very complicated, and HUD says you can do all these things. Go to the IRS website, look at what you can deduct. Really, this is, the person earning the income should be doing this. I don't think that we should be diving that deep. That should be their responsibility. This is an example that HUD gives of method one, for us to see how much that, they made $100,000. This example is awesome. They made $100,000, but then it cost them lots of money to sell the stuff. Like, I don't know if someone's selling something on eBay, maybe this is accurate, but it's a lot of work. And DOH doesn't like this method. So that's why I'm not going to go into detail on it. We do like method two, because method two, it requires, method one requires you to be well-versed in IRS rules. Again, we don't work for the IRS, nor do I want to. So unless you want to, I don't suggest that you have to be well-versed in those rules. So basically method two is us taking the tenant self-declaration for what they earned, and it's the tenant's responsibility for deducting any of those expenses to get to the net. Super easy. Verify what they've reported to you as well as you can during that look back period. Don't deduct any adjustments, meaning they have to do that themselves, and it doesn't require you to review their deductions. You just simply take what they say and what they can verify as the number, which seems a little uncomfortable in this program because we verify everything and we're required to. And we still are, but this method too is not something that DOH came up with. This is quite literally taken from HUD's directives. So if HUD is saying this is how we should do it, even if it feels a little bit different than how we do everything else, that's okay. This is what HUD says. I'm going with it. I think might be my last slide. I might have one or two after this, but I'm wrapping up here. These peer-to-peer payment apps we've seen for many years. And almost everybody I see in the VASH program has one. I see Chime everywhere. This is HUD's guidance that peer-to-peer payment apps such as Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, Zelle are not considered financial institutions, and we are not required to verify deposits and transactions made through them. So if somebody writes as an asset that their Venmo account, we're not required to ask for anything to prove that. They may think of it as an asset and they may have money sitting on that Venmo account, but it's really none of our concern. This is what the HUD guidance says. Any benefit derived to track these instruments is outweighed by the administrative burden it would take for us to figure out whether this money is actually an asset or where it comes from. And so HUD says, do not even worry about them. However, apps like Chime, SoFi, and Ally Bank, and I think Ally has changed its name to Allo last week, are online banks and therefore considered financial institutions in this program. So we would want to verify if someone is claiming those as an asset. And so the difference when I looked into this is that those like Chime, SoFi, and Olo have actual banks behind them. They will say on their app, supported by First National Bank, supported by Wells Fargo. They are actually just an arm of a real financial institution somewhere. Whereas Venmo, Cash, PayPal, I don't know how those work, but they're not supported by a Wells Fargo or a First Bank or a Key Bank. They don't have a bank institution behind them. They are private companies that make money off of people's money, I guess. I don't know. But in any event, they don't have a financial institution backing them. So HUD says, ignore them. We can use them as verification if someone wants to verify some earnings, but I point this out so that if someone says, I get money from my Zelle account, you don't say to them, prove to me that you have a Zelle account. That's an asset and I need to see it, because you don't need to see it. You don't need to see their Cash App. You don't need to see their PayPal account. It's okay for them to have those and us should not ask about them. That is my last slide. So if there's any questions I can answer, I'm happy to, or if not, I'm ready for D.
Kimberly, there was one question. I was trying to do some research on it, but it says, what if Venmo or PayPal files a 1099? So what if someone is receiving income through work that they do through the Venmo or PayPal app?
So again, I don't work for the IRS and don't want us to even dig too deep into IRS rules. I don't know why either of those would send out a 1099 unless someone worked for Venmo or worked for PayPal. So if they're earning money and using Venmo or PayPal to transfer that money, Venmo or PayPal is not going to send them a 1099 because they don't work for those companies as a contractor. It would be that they're transferring money and it's sort of off the grid, if you will. It's not something, I don't know if the IRS is paying attention, but it's not something HUD pays attention to. So somebody could be selling things on Marketplace or selling things on eBay and using Venmo or PayPal to collect that money from people. And it's really not our concern, which feels a little weird, but that's what HUD says.
I would say, Kimberly, sorry, I'm going to jump in.
Okay.
I think the Venmo and PayPal, HUD is maybe saying we don't look at those as assets, so we don't need statements for them. But if someone is reporting that they are doing some type of income or work or goods and services and they're getting paid through those apps, then it kind of would be, as someone mentioned, like money from family and friends. If they're saying, I do this work and I make this much money, here's the proof through this PayPal or Venmo account that I'm earning $500 a month for this. That's why we would be maybe getting those statements and seeing that as proof of verification of their income. We don't need to be getting those and putting those in the asset section in Elite to go, oh, these are your assets.
Good point.
But if they're using that for work that they get paid on those apps, that could be a question. If someone submits those and you're seeing consistent, they get $500 every month, people could be doing yard work or doing other work and that person is paying them through the Venmo app. So I think that would just maybe a few more questions for that participant. And like Kimberly said, all we can do is ask. Sometimes if people are getting paid under the table or getting money from family or friends, they cannot report it and there's a thing we wouldn't know about it. So we can just do the best we can with people reporting that income. And then if you want to look at some of these questions in the Q&A, Kimberly, or I can go through them.
I can read some now, but I'm gonna be the slide
Okay.
slide mover. So let's see, I can look at them now.
Oh no, here I think there's just somebody said, wouldn't we be asking for statements from family and friends as income? Yes, just like that. I think that if somebody is reporting they're getting income or getting goods from family or friends, HUD says if that's on a consistent basis, we do count that. If someone is getting paid from family or friends through Venmo, that's the same type of thing.
Yep.
When they are doing Uber, if they are working 1 month, taking 2 months off and then back, are we just recording it while they have other income on file? Or are we doing an interim every time they're doing it every couple of months? That's a good question. I think depending on, do they have other income coming in, and working with your SPOC to see, is this, I know it's sporadic, but is it every 2 months they're working? Then maybe the next year at their annual, you're looking at that to say, is this consistent, even though it's kind of sporadic? I think those ones are difficult. We all have those participants who work a month and then they're off for 3 months and then work a month. HUD does say that that's sporadic income. So I think those are really difficult. It really is on a case-by-case basis. So I would work with your SPOC on that one. And then I have a tenant with an Uber bank account, but it's tied to Evolve Bank and Trust.
So that's a nuanced question because yeah, that's an actual asset. However, we're not even looking at assets unless they're over $5,000. So you don't, that Evolve Bank and Trust is they have a bank account. So if you're going to collect their bank account information, yeah, you would collect that if you need to collect it, depending on the amount of the asset.
And I think there's just a few more, and I'm sorry, I can answer these in the chat if you want.
Thank you. I'm gonna direct the slide and then let you take over talking.
Okay. Good morning, world. Now for something completely different, but equally as practical. Since we're now entering officially CMAP season for 2026, we thought we'd do a refresh on some commonly seen audit findings as we review everything that goes into a tenant-based housing voucher file. These file order checklists, they're a topic dear to my heart because back when I first started as a housing coordinator, the admin plan and the file order checklists were essentially how I learned the position. I learned what needs to go in the file, and that's how I started out. So I love the file order checklists. That being said, they are not required to use by DOH, but we offer them as a helpful tool. They provide a uniform structure for your files, and they work for all DOH voucher programs. Side note, we are looking into making a separate set maybe for just project-based vouchers since they're quite different file-wise, but let your SPOC know if you're interested in a set of PBV file order checklists, and maybe we can work on those. But file order checklists, they can also serve as a reminder to get a required form that you might be missing for an action, and they will help you breeze through your CMAP audits. Next slide. Okay, so we have a few options for our file parts. We have a 2-part, a 4-part, and a 6-part structure. 2-part file structure can be okay for maybe an agency with very few vouchers, participants whose situations don't change very often. I honestly don't see a lot of folks use the 2-part or the 6-part. Generally, it's the 4-part. Seems the simplest and what is most agencies tend to go to. So this will work best generally. But if you do want to separate out your HQS inspections and your disclosures and your releases signed by your participants, then that 6-part file structure does accommodate that. Whatever you choose, just be consistent so that all your files have a uniform structure. Next slide. Okay, now we'll provide an overview of a standard 4-part file checklist. And we're going to use this to kind of point out errors and misunderstandings that we commonly see in our file audits, since we're going to be soon asking for some more files to audit. Okay, part 1 of a 4-part file checklist. You'll notice at the very bottom, this is stuff that will never be purged from the file. And in most cases, I don't think it should ever be archived either, as it's going to be information you may need to access throughout the lifetime of the voucher. And we do ask for the full part 1 of a file for a CMAP audit. So at the very top of this checklist, meaning at the very bottom of your pile here for part 1, you'll have your pre-application, the very first kickoff paperwork. So this is the document that an applicant completed to get on your wait list or begin the coordinated entry process, and it must never be purged. That being said, if they're an in-state transfer or report in, the initial agency sometimes doesn't send this to you, but if this happens, then just follow up with your SPOC, because we can make sure that we get with that agency and make sure that they do send what's needed. Unfortunately, with port-ins, we may not have as much ability to get documents from the initial agency that's usually out of state. So we may be out of luck with a port-in, but that will be noted in the CMAP audit when we do it, if we do choose a file that's going on with. Okay, next slide. Okay, next item in part 1, preference verification. So preference verification is crucial to accurate waitlist management because preferences dictate an application's position on the wait list. HUD very much cares about preference verification. So every preference given to an applicant at the time of the waitlist draw or voucher issuance must be verified, and your verification documentation should be stored here, never ever purged. If you're unsure what you need to verify a preference, check with the admin plan, refer to our webinar on preference verification, or just ask your SPOC. Next slide. Okay, so oops, can we get the next slide, Kimberly? Sorry. Okay, verification of disability. I would just double check to make sure that you have documentation verifying disability in the file before you mark any household member disabled and elite, or calculate medical expenses for a household, because head of household or spouse or co-head must be verified disabled to be able to claim these expenses or get the disability allowance. So you'll just want to double check here if you're not familiar with a file, you're not familiar with the case, just double check here, make sure that you do have your verification of disability. And this can be a couple of things. It could be a current SSI or SSDI award letter, not a regular Social Security award letter. It has to say SSI or SSDI somewhere on it. Or a verification of disability form completed by a knowledgeable professional. Either one of those would work. Next slide, please. Okay. So these two items, the HMIS and the security deposit request. So this is where for PSH and I think SHB too, this is where your, at least your security deposit request paperwork will all be filed. A commonly missed task with PSH or SHB move is, and this isn't going to be in CMAP because we don't do PSH or SHB with CMAP. However, just pro tip, folks often forget about a security deposit that DOH paid to the landlord for a unit that a participant is moving out of. It's generally caught kind of late in the game, like when that participant wants to submit a new request for a security deposit, and then DOH will want to know, well, what happened to the last one? Can we get the paperwork for the last one? So it's really best practice to try to incorporate the security deposit retention protocol in with your move protocol, whatever that process looks like for you. If you have PSH and SHV vouchers, I would just make it a part of your process to double check. And if you're not sure how to see if we paid a security deposit, hit your SPOC up. But generally, you'll send the landlord the retention request form. You'll complete that tenant meeting if any portion of the deposit needs to be retained. And then you'll have all your required documentation at the point the participant is requesting a new deposit, and there won't be a holdup as you try to scramble to get in touch with that old landlord. Next slide. Okay, the briefing letter. This is honestly often missing with CMAP files, but it's very important that we could keep a copy of the letter that we sent to the applicant inviting them to the briefing. And when we review the briefing letter in the file for CMAP, we're looking at these things. So briefing letter has to include the date of the briefing, an explanation of what the applicant needs to bring. The date of the briefing needs to be scheduled at least 10 business days out from the date of the letter. And it is advisable to include the reasonable accommodation paragraph at the bottom of the letter, even though the applicant is not yet a program participant. I think it's just best practice to keep that reasonable accommodation language in all of our outgoing written communication. Next slide. Okay. Certificate of applicant briefing. This is what a family signs saying, yes, I have been briefed and I understand the program. Obviously, we need this in the file in part 1, never ever to be shredded. This needs to be signed by every household member 18 and up at the time of the briefing. And must be signed by the coordinator who conducted the briefing. So oftentimes, I know when I'm reviewing files for CMAP, we may have a certificate of applicant briefing, and maybe the participant even signed it, but the coordinator did not sign it. So we're like, who did this briefing? It's not, life or death issue, but do try to make sure that all lines on all forms are completed, including your signature line. We do commonly see this document missing for in-state transfers and ports. Again, if you don't receive it for an in-state transfer, really should try to follow up with your SPOC and say, hey, I still need this required file for the form. Can you poke at the other agency and see if you can get that for us? Sometimes, for whatever reason, it's just not there, and sometimes they just forget. So it's good to send a little reminder. Okay, so, and at least for in-state transfers, we may not be able to obtain this for ports either. So just be in touch with your SPOC if you're receiving a participant and you're not receiving what you need for the file. Okay, next slide. The initial voucher. So this is the very, very first voucher issued to a participant once they've been briefed on the program. This is not where we file searching vouchers. The only voucher that will be filed here is the very first one, or a RAD for PSH, of course. So we commonly see all of the vouchers stored here. That searching voucher gets stored with, I think, the move action. So what we see here, we just want to see the very first one. It does need to be signed by participant and whoever issued it. Okay, next slide. Okay, ID docs. These need to be in the file for every household member who has ever been on the voucher, should never be purged. If a household member has left the household and you're missing any of these documents for them, like when we do CMAP and you're saying, oh, I looked in the file and I don't see any ID docs for this person, but they moved out in 2022, just put a sheet in the file right there saying this person is no longer in the household. You're aware the document's missing from the file, just so that when we send it to an auditor, they'll know not to bother following up. They already know it's gone. There's nothing we can do about that. Next slide. Okay, these two disclosures, what you should know about EIV, and then the HUD debts owed notice. These only need to be collected once for each household member 18 and up, and that is why they're in part 1 of the file and not in the action part of the file. Some agencies do collect these forms at every action, and that's fine. Just know that you don't need to, as long as you have one of these for each adult household member, some in part 1 of the file, you're golden. And next slide. Declaration of 214 status. This is another form that only needs to be collected once for every household member, even kiddos, before we can assist. So commonly we see this form collected at every annual. Again, I think it's less, I see it less commonly now. I used to see it all the time where people would have a Declaration 214 in every annual packet. And so they're verifying every year that they're a US citizen or whatever. There's no need, just one and done for every household member. A common error that we do see on this form is for kiddos. So it's a little confusing. People, in order to fill it out correctly for a minor, someone under 18, you'll put kiddo's name at the top, adult responsible for them will sign, and then they check a little box at the bottom saying, I'm signing for this minor. Not the biggest deal. And again, it's like if you see that and you know that it's a minor, I think it's okay to just check the box if it got missed, and that way it's like fine for CMAP. Next slide. Okay, request to add family and reasonable accommodation requests. Anytime you add or remove someone from a household, the add and remove family form should be stored here. Commonly, we see this form on file without the landlord's signature, which if the participant is in the unit at the time of the request to add or remove, the landlord needs to sign that form because it's their trigger to add or remove that household member from the lease. They need to approve it. Oftentimes, I think in order to remove an adult, they may want some kind of fee from the tenant for that. So it's important that the landlord is made aware of the change to the household so that they can make their changes to the lease. It's best practice too, I think, to follow up in that case and get a revised copy of the lease, just to make sure that that did get done. But technically, the landlord's signature here is like they're agreeing, yes, I will remove or add this person to the lease. And then all the reasonable accommodation requests that you receive will be filed here and never purged. Just the request pieces would be filed here. Our response letters to those requests will be filed in a different section of the file. Okay, next slide. Oh, moving on to part 2. Okay, correspondence. Just a few things to clarify here. Every file should have one termination checklist where all of the program violations and tenant conferences are tracked in one place. We recently revised our termination checklist. I think that's up on our website. I think we may have emailed it out as well. Email your SPOC if you're not sure what I'm talking about. But we do have a new one. Sometimes we see a new termination checklist started for every tenant conference, and that's just not great data management. So one termination checklist per file. And then this is just also, like I said on the previous slide, where you're filing the reasonable accommodation requests in part 1. Part 2 is where you'll file the response letters. So denial letters come from DOH and approval letters come from the agency, from you, once your SPOC has let you know that the request is approved. So see your SPOC if you need an approval letter template, but anytime your SPOC says, yep, I can approve this request, then you need to be typing up a reasonable accommodation approval letter, sending it out to the participant, and keeping a copy here in the file. Next slide. Okay, already on to part 3, reason through. Unit docs. So anytime we've got a lease up situation here, pretty much is where we're using this section. So if the very first thing that kicks off a move is you finding out that the tenant is either already has moved and you're finding out later, or they're handing you a copy of their notice that they gave to their landlord, as they should. This is where that's filed. A couple of things to note, I guess, for CMAP purposes. For CMAP in particular, sometimes we see both the mutual rescission of lease and a 30-day notice in the file in part 3 for the same unit. That's just going to create confusion for someone looking at the file later and trying to figure out, did they give the proper notice? Did they have to rescind? Which one was it? Because it's 2 very different forms. So only one should be here. I know it says both of them, but it's one or the other. And then just as a side note, like if your participant moves without providing you and the landlord one of these forms, this is a program violation, and a tenant conference should be scheduled to just discuss that program violation. Okay, next slide. Okay, So we already talked about where we store the initial voucher, the very first voucher. All the other vouchers after that, the searching vouchers, when they move, are going to be stored in the unit section. And you're going to have one of these for part 3 sheets for each new admission move action. So you'll have one searching voucher stored here for this move, let's say. Commonly, we see on these vouchers that they haven't been signed by the head of household and or the coordinator. As a reminder, it needs to be signed by both parties. I've seen this done a couple different ways where you can provide the participant with 2 copies and say, sign both, keep one for your records and send one back to me for the file. More commonly, I see it done at the lease up where you're getting all your other paperwork done. Just have them sign their voucher at that point. But some people really want their searching voucher to have in hand while they're searching. So depends on the situation. But you should always have a copy of a fully signed voucher in the file. Next slide will be our RAFTA, a request for tenancy approval form. These are required for any lease up or rent increase. For rent increases, a copy of the landlord's notice to the tenant of the rent increase can be substituted for the RAFTA as long as it's clear from the landlord's notice that no other terms of the lease are changing except the rent amount. Both the landlord and participant need to sign the RAFTA, and for lease ups, the RAFTA should really be dated prior to the expiration of the voucher, just so that there's no confusing questions about timelines there for an auditor. Okay, next slide. Rent reasonableness, everyone's favorite part of CMAP. A certification of rent reasonableness we require for all lease ups and rent changes. I say rent changes because we actually need it even when the rent goes down. Sometimes you'll do a rent decrease and you still need to do a rent reasonableness. Common errors that we do see on these forms, we see a lot of errors on these forms. They're just tough. It's a lot of fields, it's a lot of information, and we have to do them a lot. But very, very important. HUD cares deeply about these rent reasonableness forms, so we got to be very careful. So comparison units, when I say comp units, I mean comparison units. We commonly see that the units used for comparison are not in the same zip code or in an adjacent zip code. Sometimes those comparison units for apartments are missing the unit numbers. We do actually need a specific unit number for a specific unit that is available. Comp units with lower rent than our subject unit and no explanation of why they were used as comparisons. And then just incomplete fields on the rent reasonableness form, landlord contact info, name of landlord, year built, that kind of stuff. So again, just with basically all government forms, please complete all fields. Okay, next slide. Oh, the W-9, also very, very important as it's what we use to pay our landlords. The trouble with W-9s is it can really add a lot of back and forth time to getting a landlord paid if we're having to go back and forth about the W-9. Oh, line 1 is blank. Oh, they need to switch the information on line 1 and line 2. Oh, they haven't dated it within a year of today. That kind of stuff. So just kind of listed out here. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm just listing out some common errors that we do see with W-9s. It's so important to have a really strong understanding of what a W-9 and direct deposit paperwork should look like, because we don't want that to be the reason that a landlord isn't getting paid. I do see Someone has raised their hand. Are we wanting to take questions towards the end, or should we take a question now?
I would maybe save it to the end. And there are some questions that I thought we could just bring up at the end.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I will just keep talking. Okay, W9's next slide. Our HAP contract. Okay, HAP contract, the date has to match the start date on the lease and the effective date on the rent reasonableness. That's actually another common error we see with rent reasonableness is the wrong effective date. It should be the date of the action that you're doing the rent reasonableness for. The HAP contract needs to be signed by both DOH and the landlord. To obtain DOH signature on the HAP contract, you'll want to get the landlord signature first, then email it to DOH at dola_rep_HAP@state.co.us. And then once it's signed and executed, you'll send a copy of the full contract to the landlord with instructions to attach it to the lease in their file. It's technically a lease addendum. And then you'll keep a copy of the full contract in your file. Full contract, all those pages, I know. And then just as a reminder, of course, these need to be executed by DOH within 60 days from the date of the lease. Next slide. Okay. And we have moved on to, maybe we skipped a slide there, but I think now we're in the final part, our action. I think that was me, Kimberly. Sorry. So part 4, the final part, actions. You'll have one of these file order checklists for each action. So the kickoff process for most actions is going to be either they report a change to you or it's just time to do their annual re-exam, and there should be a copy of this 10 business day deadline letter that you send, letting them know what you need for the re-exam. So it may not always be a 10 business day deadline letter. Different agencies do it different ways, but we want you to be reaching out to folks, at least for annuals, about 120 days in advance, giving you plenty of time to get what you need from that participant. That letter, any letters that you send about what you need for the action should be here in the file. Re-exam letters, just as a side note as well, and really any outgoing written communication with participants should have that reasonable accommodation language found in the final paragraph of the Elite generated rent change letter. Next slide. Boom, 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 boom. These are 4 releases that we get with every action. These signed disclosures should be filed with every annual action. You may, your agency, if you have internal releases, you can put those here too. I think we have a little box for your special internal releases. If you don't have any, no worries. If you complete a tenant conference for a program violation, I would pull the most recently signed statement of understanding from here and just review what the participant signed to, and maybe just have them sign a new one. But this is where those are stored. Oh, and the HUD 9886, which is the HUD release, or no, it's privacy. Yes, Privacy Act notice. We are now required to use the HUD 9886-A instead. So I would just make sure before you submit anything to CMAP that you have all of your adult household members with signed HUD 9886-A forms on file. Next slide. Okay. Reasonable accommodation continued need forms. So if we have approved an accommodation like an extra bedroom, maybe we'll just say extra bedroom, that's an easy one. At every annual or move, you'll want to get a continued need for reasonable accommodation form completed by the participant. They're just saying, yep, I still need this accommodation that you're granting me for my program participation. So we commonly see this form included in every outgoing annual re-exam packet. And this is not only unnecessary, but it can also be very confusing to the participant because it kind of makes it seem like even if they don't have an approved accommodation and you're sending them a continued need for accommodation, it's just confusing. So I would really recommend like curating your annual packets the best you can to not be sending people forms that do not apply to their situation. And this would be a great example of that. So when you do complete an annual for someone who has an approved reasonable accommodation in the elite hot list, just make sure to let your SPOC know that you have the continued need for that accommodation on file so we can update the hot list and approve that action. So the one exception I can think of is continued need forms are not actually needed for approved higher payment standards, so long as the participant remains in that unit. Next slide. Okay, shared housing worksheets. This is not going to apply to most folks, but if you have a participant in a host home, a group home, or with like a roommate situation, you would use the shared housing worksheet to show how the payment standard was calculated. If you have questions about that, just contact your SPOC. Next slide. And our utility allowance schedule. So this is how we show HUD how the utility allowances were calculated for a re-exam. This can be retrieved from Elite once an action has been approved. So not really crucial for this to be in the file, but it is a good habit to be in, especially when you're doing a move, because you're going to want to really make sure it passes the 40% rule, and you'll need to definitely calculate your utility allowances for that. So we usually see this in the file, but it's just a good habit to be using it. It can show you where your error might lie with a lease up, and yeah, I don't think I had any notes more about that. Can go on to the next slide. These two forms, the rent increase notice or RAFTA, and then your rent reasonableness form, these are only required for actions that include a rent change. Yeah, it's best practice to file these documents both in the unit section and in the action section, because if the file's audited, you won't risk forgetting to include the rent increase paperwork when you're submitting the file for the audit, or have to go digging through the file to find it. Not a huge deal, but I don't know, that's a suggestion that I wanted to make. Next slide is on our medical calculation form. This is for calculating medical expenses. You don't need this in the file unless they are claiming medical expenses that they've submitted proof of payment for. You can use it as a guide for entering the expenses into Elite. We've actually built it to match the information in Elite. And then just remember to use correct formatting when you're entering expenses in Elite, and not to keep any unredacted medical information in the file. This is a housing file. We should not have medical information in the housing file. If there does need to be medical information in the file for some reason, we just want to make sure that it is redacted. Next slide. Okay. Income, asset, and expense verifications. Every source of income, every asset, every expense counted at an annual re-exam is required to be verified and documented in writing. This would include documentation of why a source of income or an asset was removed at a re-exam. And DOH provided CBMS and FSR reports would also go here, as well as your required EIV report. Of course, EIV is only required for HCV and EHV voucher types. Next slide. Income calculation form. We don't really require this, I don't think. I don't think HUD requires this, but we love it because it really helps us understand how income was calculated. So strongly encouraged, not required, if you have full elite access. If you don't have full elite access and you need to send your actions into your SPOC to enter, we do need this. A common error that we see on these forms is when folks include income for more than one household member on the same form. Each household member with income should have their own income calculation form. Household members who are 18 and up with no source of income of their own would complete a zero income reporting form that would begin with the income, asset, and expense verifications when you file it. What else did I want to say here? Let me just try to think. So I do often also see income calculation forms completed when a participant is reporting true zero income, and it's like they put the name of the participant and then it's just blank. Sometimes they write zero income on there. There's no real need to do that. If there's a zero income form in the file, it's clear. There's nothing to calculate. So just no big deal if it's in there, but just wanted to note that. So zero income forms too, when we talk about those, sometimes they do show friend family income. And so you'll want to review those carefully and just ask your SPOC to review if you're not sure if you're seeing friend family income on a zero income form. Okay, next slide. Our family reporting form, I have lovingly abbreviated to FRF all over the slide. So that's what that means, family reporting form. Common errors, I'm just going to hit a few that we see on this form, where household members being reported on this form do not match household members being listed in ELITE. Surprisingly see that a lot. Participant reports a different mailing address, which hasn't been updated in ELITE. A lot of folks I'm finding aren't sure how to change a mailing address in ELITE. So if you need to know how to do that, ask your SPOC. When you're on page 1 of the family reporting form, there's a field for mailing address, and that field needs to match the mailing address field in ELITE. So we need to be double checking that field and making sure that we aren't mailing things to an address that the participant has asked us not to, mailing address, just incomplete forms where required boxes aren't checked, required sections aren't completed, assets being reported on the family reporting form, but not entered in ELITE. We see that a lot where people say, oh, I have a checking account with $0 in it with a US bank, and then we'll go and look in ELITE and that asset has not been entered at all. So again, we need to be matching what's in ELITE with what the household is reporting. And not all household members 18 and up having signed the family reporting form is a common error. We have many signature lines on that form for a reason, because everyone who's an adult needs to sign. And then the supplement to application is included with this family reporting form. It's a separate form, but we put them all together. And then those are very often incomplete and pretty important when it comes to termination. So if you do see an incomplete supplement to application where they haven't signed or haven't provided any or haven't checked that box saying they don't want to provide any, and we just follow up on them and make sure that you get the information that they want to provide if they do want to provide it. Then the supplement, that supplement to application is not required in SHV. Next slide. All right, hang in there with me, people. I know we're not going to last till noon, I promise. We're almost done. Our 50058 form, this is not required because it can be generated out of Elite for any action whenever HUD requests it. So it's really only necessary to be in the file if you don't have full Elite access. Since you have to complete a hand calculate 50058 or a spreadsheet 50058 to send to your SPOC in that case anyway, just keep what you sent on file here. And if your SPOC lets you know of any errors that need to be corrected on your 50058, please make sure to do that before filing. That's another thing that we see where 50058 was submitted, something on it was wrong, this was noted, and then the correction was never made, and so that it gets pulled for the audit and it's wrong. So just make sure that things are corrected before you put that file away. Next slide. Okay, our action identifier and verification tracking form. Also, this is not a required form. It's just one that we provide in hopes that it will be helpful. It's a way to show what level of verification was used for each source of income, asset, and expense. And it's also a great place to track verbal verifications that you do. On page 2 of this form, at the very bottom, there's a verbal verification section, and this is where your auditor is going to go looking for, you know, if there's a mystery and they're trying to figure out why something was done, maybe they're going to go look at that verbal verification. Oh, they verbally verified it. It's not in the paperwork, but here it is in the verbal verifications. Again, not required, but we really do advise using that. Next slide. Our rent change notice, and this is the letter that gets generated out of Elite once we approve the action, telling the tenant and the landlord their portions of the rent and the effective date for those portions. Pro tip, these are generated out of Elite in one PDF. So if you're generating it like a landlord's like, oh, I never got this rent change notice, can you send me a copy? You'll go to generate it and you just want to make sure and separate out the landlord copy from the tenant copy before sending it out to the landlord, because the tenant copy has income information, which should be private from the landlord. So just make sure you're not sending the landlord both copies of the letter. That happens more than you'd think. Okay, next slide. We're all done with our extremely brief overview of our file order checklists, but looking ahead to CMAP of 2026, we are going to be reaching out soon with your agency's list of participants and the actions that we need for this year's CMAP audit. Again, we will need to review everything in part 1 of the file, current rent reasonableness form, and then all of the paperwork for the most recent new admission annual or move action effective between July 1st of 2025 through June 30th of 2026. New admission and move action selected must also include the unit docs. That's part 3 of a 4-part file checklist. All of your lease, your RAFTA, your W-9, all that stuff. But thank you so much in advance for helping get future funding secured for our most vulnerable populations. CMAP is our way to show HUD we're doing a great job with this money. Please give us more. So thank you very much. I think that's it for my slides, but I think it's probably question time now.
Dee, I think there was one question that came up regarding the applicant briefing. I think that I didn't notice this. We had updated the applicant briefing packet, and there is not a place for the coordinator to sign. And so coordinators are not signing the applicant briefing.
Okay.
They're like for participants. So.
Well, thank you. Good to know.
Yeah, and I was looking at HUD regulations. I don't see, HUD says here are the things we must present. There's nothing saying that housing coordinators or anyone must sign off on that. So I
Oh,
think,
good.
yeah, thank you for the folks that brought that to our attention. So we
Yeah.
will make sure that that's not required for the coordinator to sign that applicant briefing, but it is required for any adult member 18 or over to sign that form.
Yes. Thank you. I learned something new today.
Me too. Um, and didn't know, I think I answered most of the questions, so apologies. We could use this time if there was, maybe I wasn't clear enough on an answer, if anyone had any additional questions for Dee or Kimberly.
We are also soliciting any ideas for future webinar topics.
Point. I think Abby Mercado has her hand up, and I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself, Abby, if you want.
Abby.
Hi guys. Yeah, no questions for me at this time.
No problem. Thanks.
So if the applicant briefing letter or the certificate of briefing is missing in the file, so um, if it was an in-state transfer report, these are very commonly missing, and you'll just put a sheet in the file where they would be saying, yep, this is where this should be, and it's not here, and it's never going to be here. Now, that briefing letter can't be recreated either, but I guess that's the short answer. If it's those are things that we can't go back and recreate. So we just have to let our auditor know that we don't have them. That's all.
I would, yeah, suggest, like Dee said, put a note in the file, and then this could be an opportunity at their next move. Maybe you bring them in and do a briefing with them. I mean, I feel like sometimes our participants who have been on the program for 10 years, or people who are now adults that were minors in the household, sometimes it's good to do a little refresh on those briefings.
Definitely.
But that's just my opinion. I know you're all busy, so I'm sure doing additional briefings isn't a great thing. But sometimes it could be a way to put a note in the file to say original briefing, don't have documentation, did it, another briefing at this time, and have them sign it.
Yeah, sent them the video briefing on this day.
Looks like, what about the shared housing worksheet if there are only roommates but are over 18? So I think there was a question, Pat, just regarding who signs forms. So yes, if you're doing a shared housing situation or a roommate situation, those individuals should not be signing any forms if they're just roommates in the household. Doesn't matter if they're what age they are. In shared housing, our participant, who's the voucher holder, needs to have a separate lease, a separate HAP. The family reporting form only has that individual. There could be multiple DOH participants who are in shared housing, each with their own voucher. Each one of those individuals has their own lease. They have their own annual re-exam date. They fill out their own packet. You would not be putting roommates who are not part of the family on the family reporting form. I hope that answered your question. Perfect, thanks. Any other questions for Dee or for Kimberly?
Awesome. I'm still here, Lynn. I didn't leave yet.
Oh,
So I can close it out. Lynn was going to take over for me because I had to leave at 11:30. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a very informative and helpful webinar. We will put the recording of it on our website with all of the other ones that we were able to record for reference. because I think there's a lot of good information. Just one more plug for Colorado NARO, May 11th through 13th in Pueblo. It's going to be really fun. I was going to say awesome, but that's not a word. It's going to be very fun, and we hope to see as many of our partners there as we can. All right. Thanks all. Enjoy this beautiful sunny day if it is sunny where you are.